The sky, which was typically adorned with sparkling city lights, had now transformed into a sea of fiery red. The wind carried the sound of burning buildings, accompanied by the panicked screams of residents trying to escape. The air was filled with the smell of burning buildings. Los Angeles, a city that is known for its splendor, witnessed a very different scene that night. Burned smoke and fear that could almost be felt on the skin, the fire broke out suddenly like a ravenous beast. Beginning in an old warehouse in an industrial area, the fire spread rapidly through the dry summer winds building. After building gave way, old wood became easy prey, and even concrete could not hold up for long. Within hours, the fire was able to spread through the entire industrial area. Had spread to residential areas in one corner of the city stands a small mosque known as the Nur al-Salam Mosque. The mosque is not a large or luxurious building. Rather, it is a simple place of worship with faded white walls and a small silver dome that shines softly. This mosque has been around for more than 50 years, and it has been a silent witness to a variety of events, large and small, that have colored the journey of this city. For some people, the mosque is a place of peace, a place where they seek tranquility from the hustle and bustle of the city. But for others, the mosque is a symbol of something foreign, something they don't understand or don't want to understand. These ions have been there for a long time, despite the fact that they are masked by the city. Pleasantries of everyday life as the fire began to approach the surrounding area of the mosque. The atmosphere became tense, the walls collapsed, and the roof caved in. Many people thought that the mosque would suffer the same fate as the other buildings. But something strange occurred as the fire approached the courtyard of the mosque. It seemed to lose its position. Strength. The old iron fence that surrounded the mosque remained cold and untouchable by embers. The small trees that were located around the mosque yard were not burned, while the other trees in the area had turned to charcoal. The fire appeared to have stopped and was unable to reach the building, as if something invisible was protecting it. The residents who witnessed the scene believed that the fire had stopped. An elderly man who had lived in the region for more than 30 years stood frozen, as if he had realized something more profound about the incident. He could only shake his head and muttered, "I've seen fires before, but this doesn't make sense." He did this as he looked at the M from a distance. When morning arrived, the devastation caused by the fire was revealed. Evidently, the entire region had been reduced to rubble, houses and shops, and even the streets had been destroyed. However, in the midst of all the destruction, the Nur al-Salam Mosque stood strong without suffering any damage. Its silver dome continued to shine in the morning sun, which contrasted with the ash and charcoal that surrounded it. The news of this miracle quickly spread among the people. Remaining inhabitants, people began to flock to the site to see for themselves what had happened. Some saw it as a sign of divine protection, a miracle that could not be explained by human logic. Others viewed it with disbelief, even suspicion. Why is the mosque the only one that survived? A young woman asked her friend, "Why are our houses destroyed while that building is untouched?" At first, it was just a whisper, but over time it turned into a louder rumor. Those who were previously indifferent to the existence of the mosque now began to see it with different eyes filled with dislike, which slowly turned into hatred. The days after the fire were a time of confusion for Los Angeles residents. Local and national media outlets were abuzz with coverage of the disaster, calling it one of the most destructive fires in the city's history. But amid the reports of damage and loss of life, a small story began to steal the spotlight: the miracle of the Nur al-Salam Mosque. Still standing amid the destruction, journalists flocked to the mosque with cameras and microphones, capturing images of the uncomplicated white building that appeared to be unaffected by the raging fire. The silver dome of the mosque reflected the sunlight, giving the impression that the mosque was not only safe, but also preserved by an unseen force. Many journalists wrote stories about the divine protection of the mosque. Despite the praise, there have been whispers of suspicion among locals. How could such an old building survive for 5 years? It's not a miracle. There must be something there, said a middle-aged man at a coffee shop that has reopened after the fire. Several people around him nodded in agreement. MOSQUE is the name that some religious figures mention when referring to this event. Maybe they have chemicals in there, something that puts out fires. He added, his eyes narrowing as if searching for the truth behind the LIE. He believed tensions that had previously been hidden began to surface. Nurul Alam Mosque, which for years had been a small part of the community's lives, was now the center of attention. As a result of the fire, the majority of the Muslim residents who used to worship at the mosque have lost their homes. At this time, they are gathering in the courtyard of the mosque in order to seek temporary shelter. The site has caused some non-Muslim residents to express their outrage, as they believe that the mosque has taken over public space with its presence. Not only because of the fire, but also because the mosque didn't belong here in the first place. "It's changing our neighborhood," a young woman said during a community meeting that was held in a makeshift town hall. She said that the mosque needs to be torn down. Voices of support emerged from the corners of the room, and those who had been silent in the past now felt that they had a reason to speak up. The tension quickly escalated at night, and small groups began to gather around the mosque, discussing in hushed but emotional tones. Some of the groups attempted to find a way to approach the authorities and have the mosque demolished under the pretext of a pretext. On the other hand, Sarah, a Muslim who attended the meeting, could only keep her head down in an attempt to contain her anger. Others, on the other hand, were more courageous and made plans to act on their own. On the other hand, the Muslim religious leaders at the mosque remained steadfast. They believe that this mosque is protected by a power that is greater than humans, and regardless of what happens, they will not give up the mosque so easily. An elderly imam with a long white beard spends his time there. Nights in the mosque praying fervently and believing that this test is, however, night after night, the atmosphere around the mosque grew increasingly tense. Residents who had lost everything in the fire viewed the mosque with a mixture of suspicion and anger. Those who had previously only complained now began to take more concrete action. This is not a situation that is going to be resolved. The mosque is a manifestation of something that is against us, and we cannot allow this to continue if the government does not act. We must act. Small groups gathered at several points around the devastated neighborhood, and they planned something more than vandalism. The fire was a coincidence, according to an older man who is known to be an influential figure in the community. That had once consumed the neighborhood appeared to be returning, this time directed deliberately at the mosque that had become a symbol of division in their eyes. However, what they did not know was that their plans would not go as planned. Nurul Salam Mosque was not just a building. There was something bigger behind its white walls, something that had the potential to cause a great deal of harm, had seen centuries of human turmoil, and remained unshaken. The remnants of the Great Fire still leave their traces, thin smoke rising from the rubble, charcoal scattered along the roads, and a warm feeling still in the air. But in a small corner of the city, a darker mood is building itself in an abandoned building that survived the flames, a fire that had been going on for centuries. Group of citizens gathered together with determined expressions. They are not ordinary citizens who simply want to restore their lives after the disaster. They are people who have allowed anger to rule their hearts. "Look what's left," said a tall man in a deep voice. His face was covered in small burns, the result of a fire. "We lost our home, our family shop, and the mosque. The mosque was destroyed in the fire." That night, they decided to light the fire once more. They brought petrol torches and other tools that were necessary to complete the task. However, as they began to move towards the mosque, something strange began to happen within the mosque. The mosque stood without a single damage. Their plan was straightforward, but it was lethal. In the courtyard of the mosque, An elderly guard who was on duty that night stood in front of the door. His hands were holding prayer beads, and his lips kept muttering prayers. The sky was pitch black, and thick clouds began to gather above the area. The wind began to blow stronger, and the temperature of the air, which had been warm, suddenly became icy, piercing to the bones. He looked into the distance, staring at the shadows that were beginning to move in front of him. When the group arrived in front of the mosque, the atmosphere around them felt different. The air became heavy, as if every step they took had to fight an invisible force. Despite this, they decided to continue, and they lit torches and began pouring petrol on the shadows. The mosque's fence and yard, one of them a man in a black leather jacket, stepped forward to throw the torch towards the building. That's when something extraordinary happened. The torch, which should have immediately struck the petrol and created a small explosion, suddenly went out in midair. The flame that was burning at the tip of the torch simply disappeared like a candle blown out by the wind. The man was silent. His hands were shaking, unable to believe what he had just witnessed. Ken. They tried again. This time, two men went forward together, each carrying a torch. However, the result was the same. Before the torches touched the petrol, the flames on their tips simply went out. The petrol that they had poured on them did not show any signs of igniting, even when they attempted to light it with a match. "Something is wrong here," a young woman in the group said in a voice that was shaking. She slowly backed away from the mosque, her eyes gazing at it with a mixture of fear and awe. Meanwhile, inside the mosque, the old god continued to pray fervently. The walls of the New Salam Mosque vibrated softly, as if speaking in a language that only a heart full of faith could understand. The group finally decided to retreat, not because they were giving up, but because fear began to set in. He did not know the specifics of what was going on outside, but he could feel the presence of something that was incomparably more powerful than humans creep into their hearts. They left their torches and tools in the darkness, even though they were gone. Large shadows still surrounded the mosque. Glowing eyes stared at them intently, as if watching their every move in their dreams. That night, voices they couldn't understand continued to echo in their heads, even after they had left news of the failed attempt after they had left there. Attack quickly spread among the locals, and some of them took it as a sign that the mosque was, in fact, being guarded by something divine. However, for those whose hearts were still filled with hatred, the news only served to fuel their anger. What these individuals fail to realize is that every step they take towards hatred brings them closer to destruction. The New Salam Mosque is more than just a building. It is a witness to something that goes far beyond hatred, fire, or even human life. That night, Los Angeles fell asleep in heavy silence. But for those who have ever approached the New Salam Mosque with ill will, disaster befell them. A curse caused them to wake up with their bodies drenched in cold sweat in a shabby flat in the corner of the Pertingi neighborhood. City with their faces covered in burns, they awoke in a terrible condition. One of them, a man, had a nightmare in his dream. In his dream, he was in the middle of a hot field surrounded by black hooded figures. The figures were silently looking at him without showing any expressions. In front of him, the mosque appeared to be a living giant. When he looked up, his face was covered in burns. Was reflected in the large fire as if he were being punished. The man woke up with a scream that woke up the residents of the apartments that were surrounding him. His face turned pale, and for the first time in his life, he felt truly afraid. But the man was not the only one who experienced this elsewhere. Other members of the group also experienced similar dreams in their personal lives. Dreams they saw the image of a strong mosque that had not been touched by fire, while at the same time they were surrounded by forces that they were unable to fight. Each dream conveyed the same message, which was to avoid approaching the mosque. One of the dreams was about a young woman who had previously participated in the attempt to set fire to the mosque. She was unable to contain her fear and woke up in the middle of the night. She made the decision to leave town with a small bag of clothes and some money, and she boarded a bus that was headed for Arizona in the hopes of escaping the shadows of her dreams. However, even while she was on the bus, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching her. He described his dream to an elderly grandmother who was sitting next to him on the bus, and she spoke with a trembling voice. The mosque as a bright light emanating from it and voices repeating in his mind. But the elderly woman only smiled and said, "Maybe it was a warning. Sometimes we need to hear a voice from above to remind us." Music. The woman said nothing more. She just gazed out the window, realizing that she had just realized that the mosque was emitting a bright light. There was no place that was far enough away to escape what fate had in store for her. Meanwhile, in the city, the news of these dreams began to spread, and the citizens who had previously been merely spectators began to feel afraid. Some of the citizens believed that the mosque was truly protected by divine powers, and they started coming to the mosque not to destroy it, but to seek refuge there. The more fanatical group, which was led by the tall man, interpreted these dreams as a form of provocation. According to them, the mosque should not only be destroyed, but it should also be fought with force. What we are experiencing is an illusion. The tall man stated in their secret meeting that they cannot allow fear to control them. They will use explosions. The group started to gather. Explosives. They contacted dark contacts on the outskirts of the city to get what they needed. It was all done in the shadows of night, away from the sight of the police or other citizens in the city. However, every time they tried to devise a plan, something strange happened. Their explosives suddenly got wet for no reason. The cables they connected broke on their way out of the explosion. Even one night, one of them heard a voice on the phone that sounded like a whisper. It was a cleric who had traveled from out of town to visit the mosque. He said in a low voice, "This is a sign that this mosque is protected, and no human power can bring it down." They made the decision to launch a final attack that night as they were getting ready to carry out their plan. The city of Los Angeles felt another attack coming on. Strange vibration, the sky darkened, even though there were no clouds in the sky. The wind blew hard, carrying sounds that only those on the edge could hear. The tall man stood in front of the van. His eyes were full of determination, but there was also a shadow of hesitation. For a moment, he felt as if something was holding him back. However, he continued to move forward. He attempted to hide the fear with rage, but the image of the mosque standing firmly always appeared in his mind like a memory that could not be deleted when the clock struck 2 a.m. However, in his heart, there was a small doubt that began to build. The nightmares that kept tormenting him could not be ignored. He tried to conceal the fear. "I am." They started moving the van slowly while carrying its lethal cargo. The normally dazzling city of Los Angeles was eerily still that night, as if the entire city was holding its breath. There were no police officers or passers-by, just a piercing silence. However, for the group known as the Silence, their job was to carry out their mission. The tall man felt sweat trickling down his temples as he tightly gripped the steering wheel in an attempt to ignore the roar of voices in his mind. However, the closer they got to the mosque, the louder the voices became. He turned to his companions in the back seat in the hopes that someone would speak, but each of them remained silent. The silence inside the van felt like a threat. The man shook his head in an attempt to drive him away. When they arrived near the mosque, the sight they saw left them speechless. The mosque stood in a resonant silence, lit only by the moonlight. But there was something about it that left them speechless. They were silent. They just stared ahead with tense expressions. "You won't win this time." The voice sounded clearer. A gentle golden light appeared to radiate like a beacon above the dome of the mosque, which was a peculiar sight. It was like a lamp that never gave out. It was like an energy source that cannot be explained,